Okay, so one of the reasons why I have wanted to read a letter from Birmingham jail is because, and I think it's counteractive. I know, like, I have told y'all in arguments, like, don't talk about Martin Luther King. Don't use the civil rights movement. And what are we studying? Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, okay? He slaps harder than JoJo Siwa. I'm so cool now. Now I know how to use the terminology. So I was shocked, I guess last year I was asking Quiva, her group was doing this presentation, and she was like, they chose Letter from Birmingham Jail like a part of it, and I go, did y'all not study that in middle school? Y'all never studied that in middle school, Letter from Birmingham Jail. Did y'all ever study really any King? No. I mean, did you like?
Not to this extent.
You watched like I Have a Dream speech, I'm sure, right? Like, okay. Yeah. So I mean, y'all know enough just to be dangerous, right? So what I wanted to do with this is it ties directly into our like disobedience, right? We've studied Thoreau, the what King followed and what Gandhi followed was based on the ideas of Thoreau, so that's why we started with Thoreau. The other thing that a lot of people will read excerpts from Letter from Birmingham Jail, but they never read what it is in response to. So where we are starting to fully understand the argument, we have to understand like the premise of the argument, right? So we're going to read a call for unity, which is what, after he was jailed, King wrote response to. So his Letter from Birmingham Jail is a response to this letter, okay? All right, let's jump in. There's some background information, and I'm going to kind of talk to you through that as we go, as we work. Okay. The following is the signed statement, sometimes referred to as a call for unity, that Martin Luther King Jr. chose to respond to while in Birmingham jail. The 8 ministers had published a similar statement that winter as an approval for law and order and common sense, also called the White Ministers' Law and Order Statement. That statement had listed 8 chief claims. So these are their arguments, right? These are their positions. Hatred and violence have no sanction in our religious and political affiliations. Okay, so this idea of sanction means like approval of action. And that makes sense, right? Like, as a religious people, we do not approve of hatred and violence. I mean, we can say we understand that, right? There may be disagreement concerning laws and social change without advocating defiance, anarchy, and subversion. Okay, those words, defiance, anarchy, and subversion, they have a very aggressive connotation to them. Agreed? Somebody, for me, look up the definition of defiance. I need the definition of anarchy, and I need the definition of subversion. So when you get it, if somebody will tell me which one you have and the definition.
I have subversion.
Okay.
The undermining of the power and authority of an established system or institution.
Say that again.
The undermining of the power and authority of an established system or institution.
Okay. So undermining me, like subversion, meaning like I know what the laws are, but I'm going to kind of work my way around them. Okay. All right. What else?
Anarchy is a state of disorder due to an absence or non-recognition of authority.
Okay. So in this instance, is there an absence of authority?
It's a non-recognition.
Okay. So disorder. Bless you. The non-recognition of authority. Okay. And who, I mean, as religious leaders, who and what is the authority that they are recognizing? God and, well, yeah, I mean, those all go together.
The government.
And the government, yeah. Okay, and then who has defiance? always.
Open resistance or bold disobedience.
Okay. So we can agree that those are all very kind of aggressive words for not accepting or approving of a law, right? Okay. Laws may be tested in courts or changed by legislatures, but not ignored by the whims of individuals. So they understand this, right? We can agree with that. Somebody look up the word, actually we'll just do this. Hey Siri, what's the definition of a whim?
Whim means a sudden desire or change of mind, especially one that is unusual or unexplained.
Okay, so it's a sudden change of mind. Thank you, Siri. All right, so think in context to what's happening here. So like a whim is when like you're driving home and on a whim you go, Whataburger. That's a whim, okay? Or me walking through Nordstrom's going, I don't need anything. Oh, that's a whim. Right? That's a whim. So I feel like they don't mean to be disrespectful, but I feel like it is very disrespectful to call their movement a whim, right? So they're suggesting this whim of an individual is that, like, everybody was sitting around and King was like, hey, what are y'all doing? Let's go to Birmingham. Like, that's a whim. That is not what happened, okay? So I feel like that's what this is suggesting. That constitutions may be amended or judges impeached by proper action, but our American way of life depends on obedience to the decisions of courts and competent jurisdiction in the meantime. Think Thoreau. How would Thoreau feel about this idea of obedience to the decisions of courts?
He disagreed.
Why?
Because he believes that you believe in a law if like you agree with it, not just because like it's a law.
Yes. So this is this idea of like this blind allegiance, right? That I feel like Thoreau mentioned quite a few times. So they are suggesting that we should have this blind allegiance. That no person's freedom is safe unless every person's freedom is equally protected. Oh, so ironic we are. Baby Yoda. Why is that ironic? No person's freedom is safe unless every person's freedom is equally protected. Why is that ironic?
There's definitely not equal protection in this time of the United States.
Yeah. No, yeah, not at all.
This was like before like African Americans could even vote, right?
Yeah, this is 1963.
Well, I mean, black women got the right to vote in 1965. Black men had been allowed to vote since the Civil War.
So technically, like, if we're talking about the civil rights, what are they fighting for?
Basic rights.
They're fighting for their basic rights, basic equality, right? Thank you, because earlier I heard they're fighting for their freedom.
No.
Pretty sure they gained that 100 years before. Okay, so they are fighting for basic equality, their basic rights. But yet, these white religious leaders say no person's freedom is safe unless every person's freedom is equally protected. Here are the African Americans going, hey, hello, take a look, here I am. Nothing, right? Okay. That freedom of speech, we've studied that, must at all costs be preserved and exercised without fear of recrimination or harassment. Recrimination meaning like you are an accusation in response to an accusation. So somebody accused you, so you therefore are accusing them of something, right? It's just round and round. the reason why King went to jail in Birmingham was why?
The judge ruled that you can't protest.
And that is unconstitutional. And look at that. What they said is the exact opposite of what happened, right? That every human being is created in the image of God and is entitled to respect as a fellow human being with all basic rights. Do African Americans have that? Nope. Privileges? Do they have that? And responsibilities which belong to a humanity? Not really. Go ahead.
Members of the church seriously write that?
Yes. We're about to look at who they are.
Oh,
All right, so what is below this right here is, in our rhetorical situation analysis, is our writer or speaker background. And that's why I loved this. I was going to try to reproduce it, but I loved this information that they gave us, okay? So this tells us who they are, which gives us a perspective, okay? The signers of the statements were diverse not only in their religious affiliations, but in their various responses to the issues of segregation and race relations, and their own responses to King's criticism of them were also diverse. So we're going to learn about them, and then I'm going to go to the back and we're going to mark where they where their names are, like how they felt about integration. Okay, so first person, the Episcopal bishop, Charles Carpenter, and I'm just highlighting this for me, for example, had opposed integration with his diocese and 2 years later would work strongly against the Selma to Montgomery March. Yet he did work for better relations between white clergy and those of color. So if we look at Charles Carpenter, what is his position on integration? Okay, so anti-integration. Roman Catholic bishop Joseph Durek, more of a moderate on the other hand, would eventually become an outspoken advocate of integration and be publicly attacked for it. So he is what for integration? And we will say eventually, right? Because that's what it said. A lot of times people and you'll see this especially with the election coming up, when there is an idea that divides the country, they are going to hold their opinion to see where the majority goes, right? I'm not going to come out and talk about something that is majority of the country I feel feels one way and say I'm against that. Because then nobody's going to talk to me, right? I'm not going to have a chance. So a lot of these religious leaders held back their public opinions because they didn't want to be dismissed from their church. And they also didn't want to end up on the wrong side, I would say, of like history, right? Okay. Rabbi Hilton Grafman, a Southern Jew, had always seen their actions as attempting to promote racial unity. He himself had worked for better relations between Jews and Christians and remained silent until the 1970s before he expressed his frustration that people now assumed him to have been a bigot. What was he? Pro-integration, but silent. No, he was only accused of being a bigot because he didn't speak up. And he didn't speak up until his character was attacked. And then he goes, no, I am no bigot. I have always believed in integration. Oh, okay, now there you are. Right? So according to Thoreau, what did Thoreau hate the most? Passivism, right? People that had inaction. Right? So that is Grafman. He did not act until acted upon. Right? And that's what Thoreau says. We cannot do that. Okay. Methodist Paul Hardin likewise, had been working for racial integration in the Methodist churches of his conference and had been an outspoken critic of the Alabama governor, so he chose not to defend himself after King's letter, reasoning that it would only make things worse. Okay? Paul Hardin, he is what? Yep. I keep switching between pro and for, sorry. And he was outspoken against the Alabama governor. And here's the reason why we're looking at all these people, because we're looking at the rhetorical situation, right? What value does each one of these people bring to this letter and to this viewpoint? Presbyterian Edward Ramage, often described as a humble peacemaker, argued that the eight had written the letter for fear that violence was about to break out. So here, I label that as the exigence for this letter. Why did they write this piece? Because they're like, oh crap, something's going to happen. So what would we label him? Yeah, which means what? Yeah, I mean, he's neutral. He played both sides. And then notice he was later forced out by segregationists. Why would they probably force him out? Because what? Because he was neutral, because they didn't speak out for them. Right? So when you don't speak out for us, we assume that you are for them. Yep. So it's that us versus them mentality, right? The Baptist pastor, Earl Stallings, the only one to be commended by King, had preached racial justice sermons in his church and would continue to advocate for racial justice for 2 more years in Birmingham before his wife's health issues forced him to seek another pastorate. So, Stallings was what? Pro-integration. Even to the point to where he was commended by King. Commended meaning that like he was recognized for the work that he did. All right, so notice we have 2 that are not in there, right? And I probably should do more research to really find out their position, but here's what I'm assuming. Because Harmon is Methodist, so is Hardin, so I would say that they would share a similar belief based on their religious views, right? Based on their church. And then because Murray is Episcopal, so is Carpenter, I would say that those have similar views just because they come from the same church. Does that make sense? What'd you say, Josh?
Isn't the Episcopal, is that still around, or did it get broken up?
It's still around. Okay. So that gives us a little background onto who's writing this. What does this do? How does us understanding, or them not just signing their name, but signing their faith and their position and where they are, what does that do for their call for action? What does that show their readers? What does that show their community?
Like how they came to those conclusions.
Okay, so their church helped them come to these conclusions. All right, look at the title, A Call for Unity.
Trying to show diversity.
Show diversity and show how our diversity is we're from all these different faiths and beliefs, but yet we still come together. We are all very white together. Right? Okay. Now, looking at your rhetorical situation you did last night, and I know that that was for King and that was for his letter from Birmingham jail, though the context applies here. What things are happening? 1963, in the spring of 1963. Okay, so we have the police brutality at the protests, right? What else?
Unconstitutional
Okay, like what?
Like the fact that you couldn't protest in Birmingham.
Getting like mass numbers.
Do what?
That people were getting arrested in like mass numbers.
For doing what? Okay.
Being there.
Yep. Notice this little caveat that's added. What is Good Friday? What is it in recognition of?
Good Friday was the day that Jesus was killed on the cross.
Yep. Does that impact, like, why did Jesus die on the cross? I'm not going to get into a religious conversation, but why did Jesus die on the cross?
He spoke out.
Forgive
He
sins of
went
others.
against all Jewish taboos, so they felt as though he should die before he goes back and breaks more laws.
Isn't that funny? Like, in the context of what they are saying and who they are speaking out against, like, they felt there's no better day than Good Friday. African Americans are going, yep, we agree. Absolutely, perfect day. Right? Okay, let's go through a number. We, the undersigned, 1. Since that time, 2. However, 3. When I'm annotating that, I'm going, oh, there's going to be a shift of something because I see however. We agree, 4. Just as, 5. We commend, 6. We further, 7. All right, here we go. We, the undersigned clergy, are among those who, in January, look at all this progress we have made, issued an appeal for law and order and common sense in dealing with racial problems. For me, like, looking at this idea of, like, dealing, like, it can be fixed. Like, it can be easily fixed. We're dealing with it. I've got this. We expressed understanding that honest convictions in racial matters could properly be pursued in the courts, but urged that decisions of those courts should, in the meantime, be peacefully obeyed. What claims above does that reference?
Numbers.
Okay. So, what this creates is their precedence. We have done this before. We've mentioned this. This is not a whim that we are responding to. We have created this conversation months ago. All right? Since that time, there had been some evidence of increased forbearance and a willingness to face the facts. Forbearance is this idea of restraint and tolerance. So look, we fixed it. Things got better. Responsible citizens have undertaken to work on various problems which cause racial friction and unrest. For me, I feel like there's a lot of like vagueness in their response so that they don't offend whomever. Okay? So responsible citizens, according to who? Have undertaken to work. What work? On various problems. What problems? Faulty line of reasoning, right? Where I'm like, oh, where are you going with this one? Which cause racial friction and unrest. In Birmingham, recent public events, this is the Birmingham campaign that he is referencing, which was created in order to bring attention to the integration of African Americans. In Birmingham, recent public events have given indication that we all have an opportunity for a new, constructive, and realistic approach to racial problems. Oh, good. We just needed a realistic approach. Cool. However, there it is, right? When you're talking to mom and dad about going to the JoJo Siwa concert, and they're like, we know she slaps hard, son. However, right? It means you're not going to see JoJo Siwa.
I have seen JoJo Siwa.
I know, I'm sorry. And if I have to say slaps hard again, I think, one, a 44-year-old white woman should never say that. So I'm going to try not to say that anymore. Paige, did you just agree with me? Or Peyton, did you just? Okay. Peyton, did you just agree to me? I did. Did you just agree with me? I think you did. You don't look that old. That's what you should say. We are now confronted by a series of demonstrations by some of our Negro citizens, directed and led in part by outsiders. Let's have a quick little lesson on active voice and passive voice. Active voice, the subject does the action. We confronted. The subject is doing the action, yes? What did we do? We confronted. Passive voice, the action is being done to the subject. Okay, don't laugh at me. If you add by zombies at the end of a subject and verb, and it makes sense, then it is passive voice. We confronted by zombies. Does that make sense? No. We confronted, meaning we're doing the action. That is active voice. Okay? That is mindful. That means you are taking action. That is very deliberate. We are confronted by zombies, meaning that the action is being done to us. So we, the white people, are being confronted. Like, it's the exact opposite, right? Like, who is being attacked? African Americans, right? Physically, mentally, legally, right? So this is, we are now confronted. This is very passive. And it also goes in that idea of like passive aggressiveness, is I'm going to sit back and kind of look out.
Would it be improper to have like both active and passive voice in the same sentence?
No. Usually what you want is you want to stick to one voice, right? We naturally tend to write in passive voice.
Yeah.
College level writing, some professors will require you to write in active voice. It is so difficult.
Yeah, because like I was thinking like if this is a question on like a test, like a revision question.
Yeah.
And you're trying to revise like to make it like all agree with each other, would that be an option? Like trying to make everything one voice?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like switching from, in a sentence, from like present to future to past, and not like, especially when you're talking about like, say, like a character from like a novel or something, like, do you talk about him in the present? Do you talk about him in the past? Sidney Carton is, Sidney Carton was, right? Yes. Some professors will say you must write an active voice. Like I remember going in college and having to like, we naturally write passive, and this took me hours to change everything to active, right? But here, I think it plays into their opinion and their position. This is being done to us, right? And then notice he says, and led in part by outsiders. Who are the outsiders?
People who supported who have nothing to do with like other countries. Maybe.
Nope.
No.
Martin Luther King. Why?
Because he came to Birmingham once he heard about the situation.
Yes. They are passive aggressively calling King and his organization outsiders. They will not name him. We recognize now they're taking action. right? Before we were being acted upon, now we are taking action. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel, so they are conceding here, of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized. My friends, this drives me crazy. Their hopes. What are the African American people hoping for? Their basic rights. So are they hoping for them? It's not a hope. It is a demand. We're not sitting there going, gee, golly, I hope they give me my rights. I hope they make everything equal. They are demanding those rights, which you've already said every person should have. Right? So this is like, I feel like they're talking down to the organization. Oh, we understand that you feel like your hopes are slow to be realized. So it's not a hope, it's a demand. And they're not slow in being realized. They're not realized.
They say that they might be realized one day.
Well, he says we recognize your impatience. And your impatience comes from your hopes being slowly realized. Oh, do you mean over the last 100 years? Is that what you mean? Is that slow? Okay.
It's like
right?
when you ask your parents to go to Toys R Us and they say maybe later, they really mean no.
Absolutely. Let me think about it. Are you still asking to go to Toys R Us?
No.
I mean, you could still hope, but those may be slow to be realized. But we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. For who? Yeah, this time is not going to really work for us right now. Can y'all come back in about 100 years? Well, that's fine. We'll figure it out then. We agree. Notice, look at all the things that they are doing. We recognize, right? We are convinced. We agree. We agree, rather, with certain local Negro leadership. Not all local Negro leadership, certain local Negro leadership. Does that make sense? So not even just all local, just certain ones that are on our side. Which is called for honest and open negotiations of racial issues in our area. Look at their ownership, right? This is all in contrast to this outsider idea, right? Local Negro leadership. We have our own Negro leadership here. We don't need other Negro leadership coming here. And in our area, not your area, because you're an outsider, right? So it's that again, passive aggressive way of mentioning King. And we believe that this kind of facing of issues can best be accomplished by citizens of our own metropolitan area, white and Negro. Oh, gee, guess who comes first in sentence structure? White. Meeting with their knowledge and experience of the local situation. So we can infer that they assume that King does not understand their situation. That's what they're suggesting. Why? What is the situation in Birmingham? What did you learn from your video yesterday?
Martin Luther King Jr. said that Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city.
It is one of the most segregated cities in the country, especially in the South. So, in other parts of the South where King has visited or comes from, are they segregated? Yes. So does he understand segregation? So they don't even understand that they're saying, you don't understand our local issue. It's really bad here. You don't understand really bad. like that doesn't even make sense, right? What does he not understand? He understands that it's not segregated, or that it is segregated, sorry. He understands that. He's seen that everywhere. Why is it any different? It's just way worse here, which means he needed to be there even more. Okay? All of us need to face that responsibility of facing that responsibility is facing that situation, right? And find proper channels. P.S. by the way, not protesting. For its accomplishment. Just as we formerly pointed out that hatred and violence have no sanction in our religious and political traditions, we also point out that such actions as incite to hatred and violence. Okay. However, technically, peaceful those actions may be. Who is he referencing? King again. Who is inciting hatred and violence? Are the African American protesters inciting hatred and violence? No. So where is that coming from? Yeah, it's the white segregationists. That's where the hatred and violence is coming from. However technically peaceful they may be, there's no technical. Something is either peaceful or it is not, right? King actually trained like all of his people in nonviolent actions. Yeah, and how to resist and then not to act, right? Like they would sit at counters and have people throw food at them just so that they would prepare for a sit-in, right? Just to go sit at the lunch counter and know that it's going to happen. So they practiced that. So they didn't just on a whim, using their words, go out and protest, which a lot of people now do, right? Oh, we're walking for this cause. Here I go. Let me go. That's a whim, right? Oh, I can get out of school. That's a whim. Oh, I'm going to go like all of JoJo Siwa's pictures. That's a whim. Just because I can see it happening. They have not contributed to the resolution of our local problems. Again, no outsiders. So look, what you're doing, King, is not working. We do not believe that these days of new hope are days when extreme measures are justified in Birmingham. Where are these extreme measures coming from? Yeah, from the white segregationists, from law enforcement, from everybody. Yes.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you if you can move it.
Oh, sorry. Yes. We commend the community as a whole. Gee, they've been so welcoming. And the local news, media, and law enforcement in particular, on their calm manner in which these demonstrations have been handled. All right, think back to the video you watched last night or any reference to law enforcement and protests during the civil rights movement.
They were not.
Are they calm?
No, they were aggressive.
They were very aggressive.
They let dogs out and
So as we saw in David and Goliath, they let dogs go.
fire hoses.
The fire hoses at full force, and that's not just water. Like, that is a force at which you can remove skin from bone. That is how forceful it was. Okay? And they use, I keep on wanting to say billy clubs, but that's like from the 20s. Like, they kept using their, like, batons, right? To beat people back. Not calm. Do what?
They brought out prison buses.
Yes, yes. And you're talking about mass arrests, right? So for the religious leaders to notice and say, God, y'all did a really good job. It's so offensive, right? We urge the public to continue to show restraint. P.S. They have not. Should the demonstrations continue, and law enforcement officials to remain calm. Not happening. And continue to protect our city from violence. They are inciting violence. We further strongly urge our own Negro community. God, that language again. Our own Negro community. Like they own that community. Yes. It's so offensive. Well, Negro is going to be capitalized because it is a proper name, right? So it's a proper noun, right? White is just a color. It's not a proper noun. Does that make sense? To withdraw support from these demonstrations and unite locally and working peacefully for a better Birmingham. When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and in negotiations among leaders, not in the streets. Do they have a voice? No, they do not have a voice in the courts. We appeal to both our white and Negro, first and second, citizenry, to observe the principles of law and order and common sense. So, tomorrow, when we read Birmingham Jail, you will need this document because King goes, like basically point for point, and demolishes their argument. Okay? What I will